Yeah, he called a few minutes ago.
going slow. Yes, Bob.
Going under it if it were. Several years ago, I designed a mental health center down in Aiken. And they were worried about a bunch of crazies. I bet. So the check-in desk. Good afternoon. We will call to order the July 2016 City of Columbia Planning Commission meeting. I'd like to welcome all Planning Commission members, staff, and guests, and a special welcome to our new commissioner, Latrell Hartz, who will join us next month. I would like everyone to turn their cell phones and PDAs to the silent or vibrate mode. The clerk will now proceed with the roll call.
Mr. Cohn,
Here.
Mr. Dinkins,
Here.
Mr. McDuffie, Mr. Stern,
Here.
Mr. Stigemeyer,
Here.
Mr. Taylor, and Mr. Waits. We have quorum.
Thank you. I now will briefly review the meeting format. Applicants with requests before the Planning Commission are allotted a presentation time of 10 minutes. This time should include, but is not limited to, an overview of the project, case history, and any pertinent meetings held regarding the request. This time also includes all persons presenting information on behalf of the applicant, such as attorneys, engineers, and architects. This time limit does not include any questions asked by Planning Commission or staff regarding requests. Members of the general public are given the opportunity to address their concerns in intervals of 2 minutes. The administrator has a timer and will make presenters aware of when their time has expired. The Planning Commission reserves the right to amend these procedures on a case-by-case basis. The consent agenda. The Planning Commission uses the consent agenda to approve non-controversial or routine matters by a single motion or vote. Examples of such items include approval of site plans, annexations, and street names. If a member of the Planning Commission or the general public would like to discuss an item on the consent agenda, that item is removed from the consent agenda and considered during the meeting. The Planning Commission then approves the remaining consent agenda items. The administrator will now read the consent agenda.
Your consent agenda this evening consists of the approval of the June 6, 2016 minutes, and then three items, and I'm just going to mention each of these relates to the Lenore Ryan University, which you might all know as the Lutheran Seminary. They have had a name change, so just in case that didn't seem familiar to you, I wanted to mention that. So item number 2 is a comprehensive plan map amendment for a parcel from 4202, 4206 North Main Street, parcels on Kinderway, Horry Street also, and that is for an amendment to the land use plan to classify that land as a special district, number 5, which is universities and colleges. Number 3 is a zoning map amendment, which is for modifications to their PUD. And number 4 is a site plan review for the construction of a classroom/office building and parking on that parcel. And that would conclude your consent agenda this evening.
Do any commission members or guests today wish to have the items on the consent agenda removed and placed on the regular agenda? If not, I'd like to ask for a motion to approve the consent agenda. Second?
Second.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Consent agenda is approved. We will now proceed with the regular agenda. Before we start, I'd like to remind everyone when they come forward to please state their name clearly before speaking.
That's going to bring us to item number 5, which is a public hearing for a street name changed. And we were notified by our GIS department that there were 2 streets within the city of Columbia with the same name, which is Gaillard Street. One of them is located in the Cottontown neighborhood, which is near North Main and Sumter Street. And then the other one is located between Shady Lane and Evergreen Drive in Northwest Columbia. State statute allows for a name to be changed if there's a duplicate, as we have determined, to avoid any issues with life safety concerns such as police and EMS. This request was advertised in the state newspaper, as well as letters were sent to the adjacent property owners near the street. The neighborhood association was also notified, and it is our recommendation to rename Gaillard Street, that is located in Cottontown, to Cottontown Way. And this is a public hearing to do that.
Any questions from any of the commissioners to staff?
Did you get any feedback from the neighborhood association? Are they okay with it?
They approved of the name and they liked the name.
Okay, great.
Straight up administrative change to a duplicate. Nothing to do with any development.
Are there any guests who would like to speak about this or have any comments? All right, if not, I'd like to ask for a motion, please.
I'd like to make a motion to rename Gaillard Street to Cottontown Way.
Have a second? Any further discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion's approved.
Your next item consists of a zoning map amendment for 2210 Rosewood Drive. This is a request to go from C1, office and institutional, to C2, neighborhood commercial.
Any questions for staff? This is backing up, is this backing up to a residential?
Let's see here. Yeah, so you'll see on this particular map here, you have it adjacent to the land use of urban core residential. And on this map, you'll see that the zoning behind it is RG2.
Well, we have C1, C2, and C1.
Correct. You have C2 and C1 in the surrounding area. You do have a corridor plan that was adopted for Rosewood back in 2011, I believe it is. We do have a copy of that map. It's a little hard to see on this one. And that's sort of the summary of it. We are recommending that the parcel be rezoned. The plan of the Rosewood plan recommends urban transitional district, not C1 or C2. The neighborhood never really went forward with the rezoning as initiated in the plan. But the applicant's request is to go from C1 to C2. C2 is a more intensive use.
Any questions? Any questions for staff?
The way that when we get to the rewrite of the zoning ordinance, the AC1 will be a basis to influence the way the zoning would be. So that's activity corridor 1, and it may end up being that activity corridor 1 would be all of one type of zoning, or there is potential that we might have 2 or 3 types of zoning that would fit within the AC1 classification. So if you look at the land use, it's kind of broad. You know, a lot of these will talk about some commercial uses, some residential uses, because it's sort of at a higher level, and the zoning would dig a little bit deeper into the specifics of a particular area. So you might have on a particular corridor a zoning classification that might allow for more intensive uses, while in the same land use classification, you might have a zoning that's a little bit less intense. But I wouldn't be able to specifically answer that because it's not written yet, so.
Staff is recommending, what was that again, John? Staff is recommending,
Staff was recommending denial as the plan for the Rosewood corridor recommended urban transitional district.
John, do you think a C2 zoning would potentially be compatible with the AC1 land classification use?
I think with the AC1 classification, I think what you'll end up finding is that there's going to be some uses from the C1 and some uses from the C2, and you'll end up with something similar. I don't know if I could specifically tell you it would be identical to either one of those, but.
is the applicant here?
Yes, they are.
Would the applicant like to come forward?
Can I ask first, why was the objection to changing this to C2?
The rationale from the staff's position is that we went through multi-month, almost a little more than a year process looking at a land use plan for Rosewood as well as the Rosewood corridor. And one of the concerns was the increase of more intensive commercial activity on the corridor, particularly when it abuts residential. And so one of the key things in that particular corridor plan was in areas where there's existing more residential-like structures, they wanted those to stay, have the zoning, keep them more into the terms of a residential house rather than being able to give them a zoning where the house could be torn down and another mini mall could pop up. That was the rationale. And so the urban transition district was a zoning that they liked because it actually encourages the retention of a single-family home, but allows for offices and other types of uses within that single-family home with the parking in essentially what was the backyard of that residential, so you don't end up with parking in the front yard. It specifically kind of allows for change within the structure and the property, but not necessarily within its characteristics of what it looks like. And Brian might be able to tell you a little bit more about the difference of uses between C1 and C2.
But you're saying that this could end up C2 anyway, down the road?
I wasn't saying it could end up C2, I was just basically saying that in our activity corridors now we have some C2 and some C1, and I think with the code rewrite, you're probably going to end up with a district that's similar. It's probably going to be a mix of those, but I couldn't tell you the specifics.
Generally, C1 and C2 are similar. C1, you see less retail uses. For example, in C2, you could have a liquor store, potentially with a special exception. You would not have that option in C1. C1 and C2, generally, doctor's office, dentist's office, accountant, attorney's office. Those are the kind of the uses that you would generally find that would be permitted.
C2.
And C1.
Okay. You're up.
Based on what he was saying, the C1 and C2 is so closely related in that particular area because directly across from me there's a liquor store, which is C2. There's a church that's adjacent to the liquor store, and there's property in the same, I guess, block that is C2. So we're surrounded by C2 areas. And we were their special consideration, permission that they allowed for retail. So C1 in that particular area and C2 is essentially about the same, and I don't see why it wouldn't work.
There's a liquor store next to the church?
Yes, sir. Yeah, the liquor store is right here on the corner. The church is right in front of me. It's all C2. No, sir, it's commercial. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
What kind of business? What do you operate here?
Just general retail.
Yours is general retail?
Yes, sir. And they do it up under, if I'm not mistaken, sir, special circumstances. And I'll assume, that my biggest interest is someday I'm getting a little older. I may want to sell it. So if I were to sell the property, I want to be able to attract more than one type of buyer, maybe in the future or something like that, because everything else is C2.
What does general retail mean?
General retail?
I know what general retail is, but that's a very broad term. So, I mean, what
Yes,
do you
sir.
currently do for business there?
Easy listening, gospel music and that sort of thing, type of retail.
Okay.
Yes, sir. But if I were to sell it in the future, it's going to attract more different types of buyers that may be interested in buying it that could enhance the community without any adverse actions at all. So it's everything around it is C2. So it really should be C2 as well.
I've got a question.
Especially when you take into consideration that you have the liquor store right next door to the church, and those are C2.
John, I have a question for staff. The urban transition district zoning classification, we don't use that a whole lot, or at least I don't think that we've done many rezonings to it. What's the difference between that, generally speaking, and C2?
Well, I'll answer the first part of your question, and I'll let Brian answer the second half. On Rosewood Drive, as you get towards Midlands Tech, there actually is many blocks of UTD over there. And then we have I think there's some spots on Beltline and other places. So they're scattered about, but you're right, they're not, you don't find them in large quantities.
And we don't see them usually come in front of, I haven't seen one in a long time come in front of the commission.
It's not a district that usually people request to go into.
Got it.
Right. The UTD, Urban Transitional District, is intended to accommodate uses typically found in single-family areas undergoing transition to commercial office uses. District land uses will preserve the area's existing residential character while permitting commercial uses that are low-traffic generators. So it's very similar to C1. You have less retail uses. The uses that are available in UTD are fewer than you would find in C1 and C2. So UTD zoning, in this particular case, to expand retail use would not be a benefit to the applicant.
I'm just curious from an education perspective, not for this particular request. Could we go to UTD here? Because it's really nowhere nearby as I'm looking at the city block. Would it not be spot zoning then?
With less than 2 acres, we'd have to look at that, yes.
Okay. I just didn't even know if that was an option.
Any other questions for the applicant?
Oh, on Rosewood Drive? Let me go.
What John's looking at, I'll just add to Mr. Stigmeyer's last. You can have a UTD zoning contiguous to an existing commercial or industrial zone property with less than 2 acres. So in this case, 130 or 17134 in the zoning ordinance gives us that allowance.
Okay, thanks, bro.
I believe the C1 basically goes probably within a block east of the Publix, and then the C1 goes all the way to probably right before the elementary school, which I'm blanking on the name. It's not Rosewood, it's AC Moore. AC Moore, yes. It goes towards AC Moore. So it's that stretch is the main commercial area, and then it transitions on either end. I'm going to, without seeing the full map, and Brian might contradict me, but I'm going to say it's really quite a combination of what you see here. So on this map, you'll see you got C3, and then it goes to C2, and then it goes to C1, and then it's back to C1, and then it's to C2, and then it goes to C3. So, I mean, literally, it kind of bounces back and forth along the whole street into one of those 3 classifications.
You'll see a lot of C2, you'll see some C3. Depending where you are, you'll get into even some residential zoning directly on Rosewood.
Have we received any negative comments regarding this?
No, we haven't.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any other guests who want to speak about this item? If not, any other questions? I'll call for a motion.
I'd like to make a motion that we approve the request to rezone the parcel from C1 to C2.
Any further discussion?
I think it's a little bit different situation than a lot of them we've looked at in the past. It's an intensely developed area. I'm not crazy about the residential behind it, but if you look on the map, it's common for the area, so. Yeah, yeah. I agree with you, Josh. That's similar to what
Okay, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? The motion is passed.
Your next item is also a zoning map amendment for 1012 Woodrow Street. It is a request to rezone from C1 to C2 also.
Any questions for staff?
What is the UC MR1 on the west side of Woodrow? What is that classification?
The UCMR1 is a urban core mixed residential classification. So essentially, that part of Mill would be, the idea would be that it would be more multifamily than commercial. And then the UCR is the urban core residential 1, which is more of a single family or type. I think duplexes can be a secondary use in that classification. So essentially, looking at a residential type area of a variety of types, and then the zoning is the following map. You have the PUD, some commercial, multifamily zoning.
Is the applicant here?
You'll need to speak pretty close to the microphone.
All right. I am the renter, and what I do in the building is
Please state your name.
Tammy Metz. Currently, I use it as an office to do estate sales. Someone comes in, makes an appointment, I go onto their site, and I do the sale on their site and help them. What I'd like to do is turn it into a C2 so I can sell that said furniture there to the neighborhood around it, Shandon, Rosewood, the college students, so they can afford actual furniture, but be more like a boutique where you only have 1 or 2 customers come at a time, more of an appointment. I have a driveway in the back that'll accommodate 3 to 4 cars. So really it's not a lot of foot traffic, but right now I can only operate as an office. Before it's been abandoned for a year or vacant for a year. Before that, for 8 years, it was a hair salon. That was a C2. So that's what I'm asking, is to go back to that so that I can, and the house is being maintained, it's being fixed, it's a house. It's not going to be torn down and made into a store. I want it to keep it to look original to the neighborhood.
So it was previously C2.
Yes. This is my landlord.
I'm the owner of the property. My name is Sharon Kerr.
Any questions for the applicant?
Well, it would be tight. It depends on what exactly we end up classifying the use as. Is it used merchandise? Is it some type of general retail? A lot of times 17.345 in ordinance gives us ability for existing uses that are on the property to use the available parking that's there. It was a beauty salon before. I think it's always been zoned C1. It's probably a special exception that got the use in as the beauty salon. That parking was deemed adequate at that time. It was a small salon. So I think that with the parking that's available, it'll be close to make it fit the standards that we would need as far as what's on the property, but just can't say with certainty right now.
And if I may, the rationale between our recommendation is that the subject parcel is part of the Old Shandon Valley Neighborhood Conservation Plan, and that the plan notes that the residents wanted to prevent further commercial intrusion, and that the plan recommended that the parcel remain zone C1. So that's the document that we.
At C1, can they not sell furniture out of it? Am I correct?
No.
And I'll just, we've had this conversation multiple times before, and, the rezoning request is for anything that could happen in that C2. So her use in itself may not seem that, much of an impact, but if her business was successful and she chose a bigger location down the road, then any use within the C2 would be allowed to be permitted at that property in the future.
Is there any other avenue that they could pursue to operate their business in the way that they want to and keep it C1? Any sort of special exception or variance or
We have a business license currently. We approved a business license for general office use to basically, as a consultant, if you will, internet type consultant, you take orders, you find furniture for people, and you go to their location, you know, minimal, you know, say if you had a client that wanted to come there and meet with the owner, you know, I don't think that would be an issue. If you had a retail establishment where you had people coming and shopping, especially where you use merchandise store, I would put it in a different category, even a specialty items, if they're talking about furniture, we put it in a different category that would be difficult under the current zoning classification.
Yeah, the problem we've had in the past is when it buffers a residential area and we change the zoning, anything can go in. And your intentions may be fine, but if the business expands, there can be a variety of different uses for that particular piece of property. And one of our goals is protecting the neighborhoods.
My last tenant that I had in there that moved out in April of last year, I had actually put the house on the market because I live out in Chapin, and it's a long haul for me to tend to. So it was really up for sale when she requested it, and I have no desire to do anything else with it after that but sell it. It was left to me. My family left it they bought it in 1920s, and it's been left down through the line. And my husband's passed, and it's just not, you know, sufficient for me to hang on to until she came wanting to do the residential furniture. So
I guess what we're asking is if you approve a variance sort of thing, but if I move out, it's gone. She
Right,
was
right.
property, that kind of thing. But
Well,
we do have
apparently what
parking
happened the
across
last
street.
time.
And that's, I was just trying to see if there's any other way to accommodate your request.
Right, so
We're not
apparently that's what
ruling
happened
anything
the
about a
last time.
variance.
The people that were there for 8 years were running a beauty salon out of there, and that's considered a C2. So that's where I'm a little confused as to, I don't do all this kind of stuff.
I've got a question for staff. Before the development brought in a PUDR to do the residential piece that's basically surrounding this parcel, was it C1 at that point? Was that land C1 under the PUDR? Is that its underlying zoning?
Make sure I understand the question. Was the property where the PUD is now C1? I'm not 100%. I want to say it was probably general commercial, maybe even some light industrial in there.
I believe it was general commercial before my husband passed.
It was.
Got
So-
it. Got it.
I believe it might have been some, general commercial prior to the barber shop. My husband allowed the gentleman to go down and fill out his own form as opposed to going down and doing it for him. And since my husband's passed, I don't have any information on exactly how they've done that, but he was technically running a beauty shop out of there for 8 years.
Any other questions? Thank you very much. Is there anyone else who would like to speak on this?
I am Alice Parrott. I'm Secretary of the Old Shandon Association, and we would like to support staff's recommendation to not change the zoning of this property and keep it more resident. We want everything to stay as residential as possible and as non-commercial as possible within our footprint.
Thank you. Anyone else? All right, can I have a motion, please?
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion that we deny the rezoning request of this parcel, C1 and C2.
Second.
Any further discussion?
I think the C1 serves as a good buffer between the residential and the more intensive commercial uses. Certainly a realistic, reasonable request, and I'm sorry we couldn't accommodate you today, but because of your, any future uses that could happen with the property, I think that our decision today or potential decision would be in line with generally what we've been doing here in the past, protecting our residential areas.
All in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anyone oppose? The motion is approved. Before we start, the motion's denied, but it was approved. Before we start the West Gervais, which is coming up, John, if I'm not mistaken. Did I miss
Yes, no, correct.
For those of you here, we are probably not going to take a vote on it today, since we were given these on Friday, and a lot of people haven't had time to go through it. And our vote will be done in August, but we will be happy to listen to anyone who would like to come discuss it, or as John and I talked about earlier. You're going to present it, or there's some people that want to?
I'm going to do a brief introduction, and then there are
Sure.
two other staff members who are going to provide a presentation. So item number 8 and 9, we're going to present together. There's actually two items that you would be looking at. So both of them are recommendations to City Council. The first one is the West Gervais District Plan. That is an area plan, and Lee DeForth, our comprehensive planner, she'll describe the area to you in a little bit. But when you see fit to make your recommendation as City Council, it is an area plan very similar to the Mill District Plan or the Rosewood Plan or the Villages of North Main. We have a number of area plans. It's an update from a plan from the 1980s for the Vista area. And then item number 9 is, and Stacy Ritchie, our preservation planner, will be talking about the design guidelines. One of the things that we were requested to do was to take the existing design guidelines and make them more clear and user-friendly. There was some information that was in different pieces of documents. We tried to bring them all together, and so you have that particular document, and Stacy will go over that. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Lee DeForth, and she's going to present to you about the plan, and then Stacy's going to pick up from in the middle of that presentation.
John, can I ask a question before we get into that?
Sure.
In light of the chairman's remarks, what is the process for this plan going forward to City Council, just so everybody's on the same page?
Sure. So for the comprehensive plan, it's a recommendation from Planning Commission to City Council. City Council would hold a public hearing, and then they would have a first and a second reading, and then once it's adopted, they would adopt by ordinance that it's part of the comprehensive plan of the city and go from that point. And then the guidelines are actually referenced. They're actually part of the zoning code. So it's actually, they're a separate document, but they're referenced in the zoning code. So you would be making a zoning text amendment with the adoption of that. So your recommendation would be to City Council for a zoning text amendment, and then they would have a public hearing on that and a first and a second reading. We would anticipate taking those to the zoning public hearing in September. So if you make a recommendation in August, we would be looking at a City Council public hearing and first reading in September. If for some reason that got bumped, we'd be then looking at a November zoning public hearing date.
Thank you.
I don't think we should have any trouble making
I
the
just wanted to,
September
I
one.
just, yeah.
Right, and I think this is a very detailed report that's been done very well. I've only had an opportunity to read it one time, and I've got numerous questions. So I'd like to read it several times. I don't know how the rest of you feel, so that I have a better understanding of it for our August meeting.
Sure.
Well, it's a pleasure seeing y'all again today. Thank you for coming.
Yeah, we've
this
seen you
morning.
several times.
So let's see here. So the West Gervais District Plan, and I'm going to try and talk into the microphone here, covers an area that's about 184 acres. It's bounded by the Congaree River on the west, Assembly Street to the east, the Innovista to the south, and lake uses to the north. And we've had some questions about that northern boundary during the planning process, and we drew that line as the uses north of that line seem to be more associated with more institutional uses that would be closer to those associated with Finley Park. So just to give you an idea of how that line is formed. During this process, we did a large amount of public outreach. So the planning staff in the planning department worked to hold focus groups. They did a public survey, a large public survey, and held public input sessions on Gervais. Some of the pictures that you're seeing there are input sessions underneath the train canopy where they did some visual preference surveys. As a result of the public survey, we asked a series of questions that could help us dive into, perceived issues or issues within the district area. And this is a great graphic because 3 of those questions are not surprising answers. Folks do want more outdoor dining. They want, to preserve the architectural character of the community, and they are okay with a more pedestrian-friendly, more traffic-calmed area. What was surprising is that about half of the folks surveyed did not realize that there are 2 city parking garages within close walking proximity to the area. So that, we always hear about concerns for parking within the Vista in that area, and just that was interesting takeaway for us and leads to some of our recommendations here as well. During the process, we also asked folks to do what's called a wish wall. So they were to use sticky notes and post them on the Regions Bank, showing what they would like in the district area. And you see kind of a word art to the left of that indicates those words that really stood out. People consider this to be an entertainment and shopping district. And you can see parking there as well in the lower right. So to summarize the district, and I know y'all are probably more familiar with it just in your roles as planning commission members, there's a flurry of zoning districts within this area. So we are looking at a multitude of districts, both underlying districts and overlying districts. We've got 2 historic districts, portion of the Innovista area, and the City Center Design District that relate to rules and how you would develop in this area. And that is something that has been a little bit confusing for folks in the area or coming into the area, just not having a consolidated vision for the area. And certainly we've had a few changes since that zoning code was developed in the Vista. So we've developed a vision statement for the area, and I won't read through all of it, but it's really focusing on making the area more connected, making it more vibrant as a community, both with the commercial core and some residential within the area as well. So now we get kind of to the different concepts that we studied within the planning process. We looked at the creation of future land use zones, much like when you guys review a rezoning, we're looking at those area plans to get a more detailed approach. And this is the area of the plan that kind of dives deeper and gives you that more detailed approach for this specific community. We looked at establishing ground floor activity zones, mixed residential zones, and mixed-use commercial and office zones. And what that does is brings a little bit more vibrancy and a little bit more activity to those streets that may either be missed or to give a little bit more 24/7 life to the area. As y'all are following in your plan, you'll have to forgive me because I actually moved some of the latter slides forward because they provided a better summary and then the maps follow. So the map for this area shows, the one that's on your screens now is showing those mixed-use commercial, mixed-use residential areas, the ground floor activity zones, and some industrial spaces as well. So that would be the future land use recommendation that would be more specific than the Plan Columbia land use. And I'm sure y'all have heard it as well, but one of the other issues that we heard about while we were developing this plan was the concerns about height in the area. And the map that you see before you shows some of the existing heights of the buildings in the area. They range from under 15 feet to over 45 feet. And of course, with the multitude of zoning districts, you have different expectations as to whether or not those buildings could become taller as well. So the community did ask us to specifically look at how Charleston treats zoning. City of Charleston has a series of different zoning districts that have what's called a step back requirement. So instead of our zoning district, which allows you to kind of step in 1 foot and then up another 3 feet and step in in a graduated scale, they have just a strict step back. So they might be at the property line, drop back 25 feet, and then go up another 30 feet. You can imagine that that would give you space for rooftop parks, gardens, dining, that sort of thing. It also creates a more pedestrian scale feel to the street. And so what you see before you on the slides, which are not in the plan because John visited Charleston recently and was able to take some pictures of what that zoning district has done. So you can see that that upper facade is stepped back and almost seems like it's on a adjacent block, but it's actually within the block that you're seeing there. So just a few more examples. They've got the 3 times height. The 80-30 district, the district on your right on the slide, is actually the district that we are looking at copying, and it actually has a minimum district or minimum height as well. So we'd be looking at a minimum height of 30 feet, which would create some activity, create some mixed uses, and then up to a maximum height of 55 feet before it steps back another 25 feet and then raises up to 80 feet. So in the areas where we'll see on the map that this would be a height overlay district that we're recommending, and that height overlay district would have additional standards that could possibly be adopted with the code rewrite if that's the recommendation of the plan. So, and just a few more, this will give you a little bit more of a pedestrian scale to show you that step back. And then on the lower left of the diagram, you also see there is an 8-foot setback along UG, which is going to give you a little bit more space because the sidewalks are not as wide in that area. That would give a little bit more pedestrian scale feel to that area. So you can see that on the map here as well, which is, I'm not sure it's page 18 of your plan, but it is in that section of the plan talking about the proposed heights. So through the height, let's see here. The plan, did I go ahead? So the plan also looks to adopt standards that were, or not standards, but recommendations of the Walk Bike Columbia plan. Y'all are very familiar with the Walk Bike Columbia plan because we just adopted it last June. So we appreciate your support of that. And what the plan does is it calls out the pedestrian infrastructure, the bicycle facilities, and the recommendations for a bike share, which were part of the Walk Bike plan as well, and do have specific recommendations for bike share locations within the VISTA. So we wanted to make sure that that was incorporated as part of an area plan. So that follows with some maps of the bikeways and the pedestrian improvements. And then with this being a large entertainment district and dining area, it certainly requires a discussion of the public realm. So the public realm, we looked at dining, we looked at the need for wayfinding signage, site furnishings, some furniture, the provision of shade to allow it to be a place where people stick around. They enjoy being there. They're not just in there for a restaurant visit and then leaving. And then the provision of public art. This is an area that has a huge artist presence, and so that's an important part of this plan. We are looking with those recommendations as to creating what's called a pedestrian zone. Those of you who may have visited Asheville would be familiar with the upper left picture in there. That would be along Battery Park. And what we're looking at is similar to a street that would have traffic. You'd still be able to drive your car, drive your vehicles, park, that sort of thing. However, the street or the streetscape is really designed around the pedestrians. So it's an area that it feels more comfortable to walk in and walk around. A good example of that might be Wall Street in Asheville, which is the little kind of paver street that runs near the iron statue. We're also looking at, in that area and others, the possibility of creating open streets events. The Open Streets movement is a movement that's pretty exciting. It's something that we've been looking at from a Walk Bike Columbia perspective as well, and it encourages activities. So it's either an annual or a monthly event that gets people out, gets people using their city in different ways. So I think the VISTA is really ripe for that kind kind of flurry of activity that could bring people in, allow them to stay, stick around, shop, dine, enjoy the area, but really kind of populate the area in a more active manner. The plan also makes some recommendations and reflections on recommendations that have been made previously to the Lincoln and Lady Street Plaza. So there are some long-going plans. People have talked about this for a number of years, the need for a plaza along Lincoln and Lady. So the plan just calls out and summarizes those recommendations that have been made throughout the years. And to follow kind of that summary up, we have a map as well that looks at the public realm, looks at the locations for a possible art walk. You've got the Vista Greenway tie-in, the pedestrian zone along Lincoln is where we would be looking at that. Some locations for mid-block crossings, which would allow people to move more freely throughout the area, as well as some pedestrian cut-throughs. Those are the solid green lines. And one of the recommendations that we heard from community members was to follow the existing rail corridors or the old rail corridors or the old alleyways that could allow people to have a more pedestrian movement and kind of cut through blocks and get where they're going. So that's something that we took away from folks in the community. And the plan also makes some recommendations for some green infrastructure, some green alleys, roofs, and parklets to really engage folks and allow them to use the public space. So, and the meat of the plan, which Chairman Cohen, you referred to the fact that it's a very detail-oriented plan. The implementation recommendations are very detail-oriented as well. We really tried to come up with some recommendations that would be easier to follow and actually hold folks accountable. So you'll see with each of the recommendations within the plan that they're labeled short-term, medium-term, or long-term, and then also that they list whoever would be responsible. It might be city planning, it might be engineering, it might be the Vista Guild, it might be private investors, but who could really take that part of the plan and run with it? So that is the end of my presentation, and I would be happy to answer any questions.
I think it's in this part, or it's in this part. I don't know which one, but one of the things that I've had several inquiries on, of course, I tell them to come to the meeting and get your questions answered, are the height restrictions. If they're cast in stone, things like that. The other thing I'd like to see improved is the expedite the approval of signs and things. It took me 4 years to get a sign myself, and I can't for the life of me understand why.
Sure.
In just my in a one-time reading of this, I just want to make sure we have a little bit of flexibility. I like to keep the Vista the way it is too. I have an office in the Vista, but at the same time, flexible on certain items. Like, I think there were some things in here that talked about we want to keep the same materials that were on the building. Sometimes that's not, it's great, but they don't make them. And to repair one may not be the answer to solving the problem. We've run across that. I'm sure others have as well.
So I think that is where we're looking at two different documents here. So what I'm here to talk about is the plan, and Stacy will talk a little bit about the guidelines.
Okay.
Yeah. The plan is the one that does address height, however. It addresses it in a recommending fashion. It's not set in stone. Just like with any plan, we hope that the plan will be implemented to match what our current zoning code is. And really the goal with having this come through the planning process and hopefully be adopted in September is that with those recommendations that we're making, the folks that are working on the code rewrite can really take in those recommendations, and they may not take them in exactly as they're written. It's not prescriptive, but they would use that to say that, the community wants, say, for example, a step back, but maybe they don't want the same step back, or maybe that, they study it more in depth and they want to match it to other zoning districts within the area. But so the recommendations of this plan, one of them would be the adoption of that height overlay. As far as the signs and the materials, Stacy will be covering those shortly.
Okay. Any questions? Any other questions? Thank you very much.
Sure.
Good evening. Good evening. Can you hear
How are
me?
you?
Oh. There we
There's a
go.
little button in front of the mic.
I've got it now, I think.
Okay.
Okay, good evening. My name is Stacy Ritchie, and I'm one of your historic preservation planners. Worked extensively on this project, so I'm sure I'll be able to answer most of your questions. So you're looking at the 8.5 by 11 document now, not the larger one. Basically, this district was created in 1994 with a set of guidelines, and this is an update to that document. They are both based on the Secretary of Interior Standards for Historic Rehabilitation, which is the framework that historic districts use throughout the nation. The Secretary of Interior maintains the National Register, puts out preservation, technical information, things like that. So we're looking at essentially the same review that we have always had in this area. This document updates some of that information so that it is clearer for people, both people applying for changes and staff. We have a brief history in here just to let you know a little bit more about the district. Thank you, Krista. Let you know a little bit more about what you're looking at in the Vista, because you're not looking at first-generation buildings there. The first generation of buildings in this area was residential, so you were looking at a turn of the 20th century neighborhood. And that is the cohesive look that you still maintain today. We have identified 3 basic building types that became the blocks of this area: the warehouse, the office, and the store. And they all have their own characteristics. And so as we look at new buildings coming in, we would look at some of these characteristics and see where they fit, so that we are not prescribing one-size-fits-all sort of historic preservation ideas. This is the current map that exists since 1994, and we're keeping this same map. On the right side of the map, in a slightly yellowish color, is the historic commercial district. And in the reddish color to the west is the protection area. These are 2 distinct areas with 2 distinct sets of guidelines, just so you're aware. The area to the east is the most concentrated area with historic buildings. It also is somewhat similar to the National Register district boundaries. The area to the west is highly compromised with a number of new buildings and vacant lots, so it does not have the cohesiveness of a typical historic district. Much like your review process, we also have the DDRC, and this is just some information with a flowchart of how those decisions go through either staff review or commission review. For new construction, we are interested, like any historic district, in having the new buildings fit in well with their surroundings. So we do have some examples in the west half, in the protection area, for instance, where we have large columns on buildings. We have front porches or porticos. Those are not things that are consistent with historic buildings in this area. So we would not encourage those on new construction. The setbacks, you would not, for instance, have a lawn in front of a new building. We would want those buildings to be just like the other historic buildings right next to the street. Storefronts are integral to this area. A storefront doesn't necessarily have to be a retail establishment, but more so just the area that's adjacent to the street. And so we have different possibilities within these guidelines to encourage people to keep a high percentage of glass, keep that as clear as they can, and to maintain some of the same rhythms that you see on historic buildings. Roofs are typically flat. We do have Wet Willie's and the Blue Marlin building have hip roofs, but that's quite atypical for the area, so we would encourage generally for people to use flat roofs. And then we have a section on rehabilitation and maintenance, and this has to do with the historic buildings that still exist there. The fact that they've survived 100 years with minimal changes is something to be proud of, and it's partly due to the fact that this has been a historic district for 20 years. So in keeping with best practices for preservation, we would encourage retention of historic materials such as any historic storefronts. Any doors that are still there, they can be repaired. Windows and other features. And then finally, of course, we would review demolition requests. We only review demolition in the east half, which is the historic core. We did not review demolition in the west half. You mentioned signage. We did not really have much clear language about signage before. Excuse me. But now we have, I think, 8 pages on signage. This should cover just about any potential sign that my boss, Amy Moore, was able to think of, who is the person generally reviewing signs in this area. So we have prohibited materials and permitted materials. We have designs that are permitted that are not. We do want to encourage things that minimize the intrusion into historic building materials, such as individually pinned letters. We would prefer something on a raceway so that the brick is not deteriorated. And also, as you're aware, this is located in the City Center Design District. So we pulled information from that language and put it here so that this can serve more as a one-stop shop for people. So there are elements in here about urban design. And then this is the one-page document that we have for the protection area on page 47. And it also references some of the site designs guidelines that apply also to the commercial district. So generally, this is very limited in what we will review for the protection area. We do mention in here briefly about our incentives with the Bailey bill, also with state tax credits. And that's essentially the end of that. I will speak briefly to your points earlier. The most common building material out there is brick. So we would encourage repair of brick, which can be done, or repointing, which can be done. It may not match perfectly, but we're not going to make someone go special order out of the particular clay pit that brick came out of, which probably doesn't exist anymore. So we do try to work with people if material is not available. The other materials out there are generally terracotta, which can be repaired as well. We've had some successful examples on Main Street. But we also have a commission, and so if we can't agree on a material that cannot be repaired or found, we can allow people to try alternative materials and see if our commission would approve that.
Mine was wood.
Well, wood's widely available, so I don't know. If you find a good carpenter, you should be okay.
Well, personally, I'd like to commend you on you and everyone who worked on this.
Thank you.
You've done an excellent job. We just want to refine it up a little bit, because once we approve it, it goes to council.
Correct.
So I think there were a few people that wanted to just have an opportunity to read it once or twice, and I promise you next month, we'll move forward on it.
Well, in the meantime, if you have questions for me.
Anyone else?
I've got an observation, I guess you'd call it. It's on page 43, where you're talking about parking. I don't see anything wrong with what you got here. I think it's just an admirable way of trying to do what you want to do with the parking areas, particularly the trees and the hedges and so forth. What I'm concerned about, and the reason I bring this up is it may be an impossibility, but something that staff could think about, and if it's worth trying to explore for the long term, as one statement here was, surface lots shall incorporate shade trees to create a continuous canopy. Any trees that are planted along the street will never reach maturity, because the power company is going to come in and cut them down when they get 15 feet tall or more. Maybe an exaggeration, but the point is that I don't know how you can, I think something's got to be approached in that area, not just for trees, but I think we've got a bad situation in Columbia with power lines. And there needs to be some strong effort to work with SENG over the long haul to try to get those things underground. I look at all of these photos that you've taken of other areas, other locations. I don't see a power line in any of them.
Unfortunately, Gervais Street has been buried from much of the vista. but
Right.
I don't know about the
I
side
agree.
streets.
I agree, but,
Yeah.
we've got a lot of other areas, and it's ridiculous in some places. So I'm just asking that you look into that down the road, and, hopefully if we can discuss it a little more length next time as to what the possibilities are of getting rid of some of these power poles.
I appreciate your comments.
Any other questions?
Thank you for your time.
Thank you. I believe.
So you have a couple options before you. You could not hear the public comment this evening and wait till next month, or there's people who are here who I don't know, maybe they might not be able to make it next month, and you'd want to listen to them. So,
Yeah, if they're here,
then
why not?
I'll let you see if anybody else wants to say anything.
Is there anyone else who would like to come forward and discuss this?
Good afternoon, I'm Dale Marshall. I'm the chair of the Development Committee for the Congaree Vista Guild. And we basically are very comfortable with where this proposal has ended up. I mean, we'd like to thank the city staff for a huge effort over the last 6 or 7 months, meeting with us multiple times, conducting public hearings, getting this out, getting an opportunity to get feedback from all parts of our community, and they've been very receptive at taking comments that we've offered, and there have been multiple revisions and changes and tweaks taking our feedback, and so we're greatly appreciative of that. We think this is a proposal that now moves things forward while still retaining the design guidelines that we fought very hard for in the early 90s. And so, again, at this point, we feel like we've got a document that reflects a positive outlook to move forward for the neighborhood, and we feel like the staff has just been incredibly hardworking at getting feedback from all aspects and all parts of our neighborhood community, and we appreciate that. And so we'd like to encourage you, when you consider this next month, to move forward with it. There are some very positive things in here in terms of how it reinforces growth patterns that we want to see happen in terms of residential focus, in terms of pedestrian focus along streets, in terms of creating nodes at Lincoln and Lady and other things that, if this can happen, or as this happens, it will continue to develop the Vista in a way that we think is a very positive thing. So again, we're very appreciative of what the staff has done, and we think this is a great step forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to come forward?
Hi, my name's Jim Caldwell. I live in the Vista, and I'm treasurer of the Vista Neighborhood Association. I'd just like to echo what Dale just said. We've worked with staff, I don't know if I'm going to say all the way through it, but a good part of it, and they've been very helpful to us. Our biggest things are height, which you've probably heard about, and the second one, Dale touched on it, would be connectivity. We describe it crossing the street. When you live there, it's a game of Frogger, basically. Columbia is a great place, but what we would encourage, and you can see it in this document, is to keep the connectivity going. Connect us to Main Street, connect us to the river, connect us to the Inner Vista, whichever way you want to look at it. Arsenal Hill, we can do it now. We got the tunnel. That's a fantastic step. I wasn't really involved in any of that, but whoever came up with that, that's the type of thing this city needs, and it'll grow. We basically think we can put, I know a lot of people want feet on the street, boots on the ground. We don't disagree with that. We think we can do that. We know we can do that. A lot of us travel around the country, around the world. We just don't think we need gigantic buildings to do that. We think we can do it, connect it, You can put big buildings in other areas, but you've got a gem of a place that's right there, and we'd ask that you just keep that in mind as we move forward. Thanks.
Thank you.
My name is Steve Henson. I'm also a Vista resident and in the Vista Neighborhood Association with the Development Committee. And I want to echo what Dale and Jim said. I think that this is a good plan going forward. We're particularly concerned, as Jim mentioned, with kind of the height and scale of buildings that they fit in. And I personally, particularly the setback being 25 feet versus the current thing, which is like 1 back and 3 up. I think the 25 feet of setback is a good move forward to kind of keep the scale in keeping with what we currently have down there. So anyway, I just want to lend my support to it also. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank all of you for your comments. Is there anyone else who would like to come forward? If not, I don't believe there's any other business.
Probably a motion just to defer it to next month?
Yep. Can I have a motion, please?
Both number 8 and 9.
Would move that we defer items 8 and 9 to the August
August 1st.
for any decisions.
Any further discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion for adjournment.
Thank you for a very busy day.
Thank you. John, I signed it. What happened when